Chapter 1 of On Sleeping and Waking in Parva Naturalia by Aristotle, translated by William Alexander Hammond. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards. Chapter 1. We must now consider the subject of sleeping and waking, and ask what they are, and whether they are phenomena peculiar to the soul, or common to the body and the soul. And if they are common, we must further inquire to what particular organs of the soul and body they belong. Further, we must inquire to what cause this animal function is due, and whether all animals share in both sleeping and waking, or are certain animals endowed with the one, and others exclusively with the other, or are there creatures that are endowed with neither of them, and others with both? In addition to this, we must investigate the nature of dreams, and explain why persons sometimes dream in sleep, and at other times do not. Or shall we say that dreaming always occurs in sleep, but we do not remember our dreams? If this is true, what is the explanation? A further question is whether or not it is possible to foresee future events, and if it is possible, in what sense are they foreseen? Further, is it possible to foresee only such future events as are performed by man, or also such as are caused by divine power? And does this foresight apply to what takes place in the course of nature, or to the results of accident? First of all, it is evident that both sleeping and waking are to be ascribed to the same organ, for they are contrary functions, and sleep is clearly the negative of waking. Now, contraries, whether in the realm of nature or elsewhere, are always expressed in one and the same organ capable of receiving them, and are affections of the same thing. I mean, e.g., health and disease, beauty and ugliness, strength and weakness, sight and blindness, hearing and deafness. This is further evident from the following. It is by the same sign that we recognize a person awake and one asleep. For when a person has sensation, we regard him as awake, and we believe that every waking person has sensation to a certain extent, either of the external world or of internal processes. If, then, waking consists in nothing else than in having sensation, it is evident that by virtue of that organ wherewith one has sensation, waking creatures are awake and sleeping creatures are asleep. But since sensation is not the function exclusively either of the soul or the body, for where there is potentiality, there is also a corresponding actuality, but what we understand by sensation in its actual sense is a physical process mediated by the body, it is plain that this phenomenon does not belong exclusively to the soul, and, on the other hand, it is impossible for an inanimate body to experience sensation. In earlier treatises, we have analyzed the parts of the soul, as we call them, and explained that the nutritive part is different from the other powers in animate bodies, although no other power can exist independently of it. From this, it is evident that such living creatures as are endowed only with the functions of growth and decay do not experience sleeping or waking, as e.g., plants, for they have no organ of sensation, whether separated from or conjoined with the organ of nutrition. In potentiality and mode of expression, these two organs are separable from one another. It is likewise true that there is no creature that continuously wakes or continuously sleeps, but both these conditions are found in the same animals. If an animal has sensation, it is impossible that it should not sleep and wake. Both these phenomena refer to the experience of the primary organ of sensation. It is impossible that either of these conditions should be continuously found in the same creature, e.g., that any species of animal should sleep or wake constantly, because whenever we find a natural function, as soon as the time is exceeded during which the function is capable of being exercised, the organ necessarily becomes impotent, just as the eye, by exercising vision, becomes unable to perform this function. The same thing applies to the hand and to every other functioning organ. Now, if there is an organ to which the function of sensation belongs, and the time is exceeded during which continuous sensation is possible, then the organ will become powerless and no longer perform its function. If, therefore, waking is defined in terms of this condition, viz., as the release of sensation from a state of impotency, and if of two contraries one must always be present and the other absent, and if waking is the contrary of sleeping, and consequently one of the two must in every case be present, then sleep would be necessary. Consequently, if this is the nature of sleep, and it consists in a loss of power through excess of waking, and excess of waking is sometimes pathological and sometimes normal, so that the incapacity and its recovery would also have the character of the pathological and normal, it follows that every waking creature must also sleep, for continuous activity is impossible. So too there is no creature that can sleep continuously. For sleep is a condition of the sense organ, which is like being fettered and held immobile. Every sleeping thing, therefore, must have a sense organ. By sense organ, we mean that which has the capacity of actual sensation. But to have actual sensation in its proper and strict sense, and to sleep at the same time, is impossible. All sleep, then, must be a condition from which waking is possible. Almost all animals, whether their natural abode is the water, air, or land, evidently have the power of sleep, for we see all varieties of fishes and mollusks sleeping, and every other variety that has eyes. Also, the hard-eyed animals and the insects evidently sleep. The sleep, however, of all such animals is brief, and consequently an observer may not notice whether or not they share in sleep. In the observation of crustaceans, it has so far not been clearly established whether they sleep or not. If, however, the foregoing reasoning is convincing, then one will believe that sleep occurs in this class. That all animals, therefore, share in sleep is proven from the foregoing. For the definition of animal is given in terms of the possession of sensation, and we define sleep as in a certain sense the immobility and fettering, as it were, of sensation, waking as the delivery and release from such condition. No plant can participate in either of these conditions, for without sensation neither sleeping nor waking occurs. Creatures that are endowed with sensation feel pleasure and pain, and when these are felt, desire is also felt. None of these phenomena, however, is found in plants. A proof of this is that the nutritive part performs its own function better during sleep than in a waking state, for at this time nourishment and growth are more rapid, which shows that for these purposes there is no need of the additional power of sensation. Chapter 2. We must now inquire why it is that sleeping and waking occur, and to what sense or senses, if there are several, they are due. Since some animals have all the senses and others not, e.g., some do not have sight, whereas touch and taste are universal, excepting in cases of abnormal creatures. And mention has been made of these in the treatise on the soul. And further, since it is impossible for an animal in sleep to experience any sensation whatever, it is clear that we shall necessarily find this condition in all the senses during what we call sleep. For if an animal were to sleep in one part and not in another, then it would have sensation in sleep, which is impossible. Now, in every sense there is a power which is peculiar to it, and another power which it has in common with others, e.g., vision is peculiar to the eye, audition to the ear, and similarly, peculiar powers belong to the other senses. But there is also a kind of common power that is associated with all the particular senses, by virtue of which one is conscious that one sees and hears. For by means of sight one does not perceive that one sees, and one discriminates and has the power of discrimination between sweet and white, not by virtue of taste or sight, nor by means of the two combined, but by means of a certain power which is common to all the sense organs. For sensation is unitary, and the master organ of sensation is unitary, although there is an essentially different character that belongs to each category of sensation, e.g., to sound and colour. This common element is allied more nearly to the tactual than to any other sense. For the tactual can exist apart from all the other sense organs, but the others cannot exist apart from it. This, however, was discussed in the studies on the soul. Sleeping and waking, then, are evidently an affection of this common sense, and are consequently found in all animals, for touch is the only universal sense. Now, if sleep consisted in the fact that all the senses undergo something, then it is remarkable that in cases where it is not necessary, or in a certain sense not possible, for them to be simultaneously active, yet these same senses should become simultaneously inactive and immobile. On the contrary, it is more plausible to suppose that they are not at rest simultaneously. But the explanation that we have given of these phenomena is a rational one. For when the master organ that rules over all the others, and to which all the others are directed, is affected, all the subordinate organs are necessarily affected with it. On the other hand, when one of the latter is disabled, it is not necessary that the master organ should be disabled also. But it is evident from many considerations that sleep does not consist in the inactivity and non-use of these special senses, nor in their incapacity to experience sensation. For this is just the sort of thing that happens in swooning. Swooning is the exhaustion of the senses, and there are also certain other kinds of mental disturbances that resemble this. Also, by compressing the jugular vein, one loses sensation. But whenever there is a loss of the use of sensation, it does not find its explanation in any chance sense, nor is it attributable to any haphazard cause. But the explanation is found, as we just now said, in the primary organ of all sensation. For when this is disabled, all the other sense organs are also necessarily unable to have sensations. When, however, one of these latter loses the power to act, the common sense is not necessarily disabled. We must inquire to what cause sleep is due, and what sort of an affection it is. Now, there are several kinds of cause. For we speak of cause in the sense of the end or purpose, again as the principle of motion, as the material condition, and as the notion or form. First of all, then, when we say that nature acts with a purpose, we mean that this purpose is some good, that rest is provided for every creature whose nature it is to move, and that, being incapable of constant and continuous pleasurable movement, this rest is a necessary and useful thing, and the metaphorical term, quotes, rest, is with perfect accuracy applied to sleep as repose. Consequently, sleep exists for the preservation of animals, and the waking state is its final cause and purpose. For sensation and thought are the final purpose of all animals that possess either of these powers. These are their highest activities, and the highest is the end. Sleep, therefore, is a necessity for every animal. I mean here a hypothetical necessity, viz., that if an animal is to preserve its nature, it must necessarily be provided with certain things, and where these things are found, other things are involved. We must next ask to what sort of bodily process and activity waking and sleeping are due. We must assume that the causes of sleeping and waking are the same, or analogous in bloodless and sanguineous animals, and in the lower sanguineous animals and men, so that what we observe in the case of man we shall have to apply to them all. It has been already determined in other treatises that the origin of sensation is found in the same organ from which motion originates. This organ is found in the middle division of the 3 topical sections of the body, and lies between the head and lower body. In sanguineous animals it is the pericardiac section, for all sanguineous animals have a heart, and this is the primary source of motion and of the higher sensation. Evidently, the origin of movement and of breathing, and in general of refrigeration, is found in this section, and it is also evident that nature created the organs of respiration and of refrigeration, which latter is effected by means of moisture, for the purpose of maintaining the warmth in this part. But this subject will receive separate treatment later. On the other hand, in the bloodless animals, the insects and such animals as are incapable of breathing air, there is found in an organ corresponding to the lungs congenital air which rises and falls. This is evidently true in the case of insects with undivided wings, such as wasps and bees, also in flies and similar insects. But since it is impossible to originate motion without power, the retention of the breath generates power. Breath derived from without in the case of respiring creatures, and congenital breath in the case of non-respiring animals. This is the reason why, as we see, winged insects buzz when in motion, the sound being caused by the friction of the air striking on the diaphragm of these Holoptera. Every creature experiences movement whenever a sensation, whether its own or caused from without, is awakened in the primary organ of sensation. Now, if sleeping and waking are affections of this organ, it is clear in what region and in what ultimate organ sleeping and waking have their origin. There are persons who are subject to movements in sleep, and do many acts that belong to the waking state, and nevertheless without any image or sensation. For the dream is in a certain way a sense perception. About this we must speak later. Why it is that we remember our dreams on waking, while we do not remember acts done in a waking state, has been explained in the Problems. Chapter 3. Following upon what has been said, we have to consider to what occurrences the phenomenon of sleeping and waking is due, and what is its origin. Now, it is plain that as soon as an animal has sensation, it must at once take nourishment and grow. Food in its final state is, in all sanguineous animals, blood, and in bloodless animals something analogous to blood. The blood is contained in the veins, the origin of which is found in the heart, a fact which is demonstrated by dissection. When food has been introduced from without into those parts intended for its reception, an evaporation takes place in its transmission into the veins, and here it is transformed into blood, and is carried to its main organ. This subject was discussed in the treatise on food, but we must resume it now for the sake of observing the origins of animal movement, and of seeing to what affection of the organ of sensation waking and sleeping are due. For sleep is not any random exhaustion of the power of sensation, as said above. Senselessness, choking, and swooning produce a similar exhaustion. And in some cases of swooning, there has been found even a strong power of imagination. Now, this creates a problem, for if it is possible for a swooning person to fall asleep, then this imagination might be regarded as a dream. Also, people often talk when they are in a deep swoon, and are to all appearances dead. To all these cases of swooning, however, we must suppose that the same explanation applies. But, as we have said, sleep cannot be any and every incapacity to feel sensation. On the contrary, this particular condition springs from the evaporation of food. For the evaporation must be thrown off to a certain extent, and then it must return and change again, like the ebb and flood of a shifting strait. All animal heat tends to rise. When, however, it reaches the upper parts, it turns about and courses down again in mass. Consequently, sleep is most easily produced after taking food, for a large quantity of moist, crass matter is then carried to the upper parts. This, by remaining there, produces heaviness, and causes one to fall asleep. But when it descends, and in turning throws off its heat, then sleep ensues, and the animal slumbers. A proof of this is furnished by the action of narcotics, for they all, whether liquid or solid, produce heaviness, e.g. the poppy, mandrake, wine, and bearded darnel. And those who droop their heads and nod into slumber appear to be in this heavy condition. They cannot lift their heads or eyelids. Sleep of this sort follows mostly on the taking of food, for there is then a strong evaporation from food. It further arises from certain fatiguing efforts, for fatigue tends to waste, and waste matter is like indigested food, when it is not cold. Certain diseases, such as are due to an excessive amount of moisture or heat, produce this effect of sleep, as is the case, e.g., in fever and lethargy. Further, early infancy produces it, for children sleep a great deal, because all their food rises to the upper parts. A proof of this is seen in the excessive growth of the upper parts in proportion to the lower ones in early childhood, due to the fact that growth tends in that direction. It is to this cause also that epileptic conditions are due, for sleep is similar to epilepsy, in fact, is epilepsy in a certain sense. And so the beginning of this condition in many cases happens during sleep, and while asleep persons have an attack of it, but not while awake. For when a great mass of fumes is carried to the upper parts, in descending they press on the veins, and produce constriction of the passage through which respiration takes place. Consequently, wine is not good for children, or for wet nurses, for it makes no difference, perhaps, whether the wine is taken by the children or by the nurses, but they should drink it thinned with water and in small quantities. For wine contains spirituous fumes, especially wine of dark colour. In children, the upper parts become so full of food that during 5 months of life they cannot turn their necks, for a great quantity of moisture rises to the upper parts, just as it does in the case of persons who are very drunk. This phenomenon suggests a rational explanation of the fact that the embryo remains at first quiet in the womb. Also, in general, persons with deep-lying veins, of dwarf-like structure, and with large heads are given to sleep, for the veins of the one class are small, and so the moisture in its downward course cannot readily flow through them, while in the case of persons of dwarf-like structure and large heads, there is a great pressure and evaporation towards the upper parts. Large-veined persons are not given to sleep because of the facility for the passage of blood in the veins, unless there be some adverse conditions present. Neither are the atrabilious especially inclined to sleep, for their internal parts are cool, and so no considerable evaporation takes place in them. Consequently, owing to their dryness, they are fond of eating, for the condition of their bodies is such that they seem to have eaten nothing. For the black bile, being in its nature cool, cools the nutritive region and the other parts, where this excretion of bile is potentially present. From the foregoing, one sees that sleep is an internal concentration of heat, and a natural reaction from the cause named. For this reason, a person in sleep moves a great deal. From the moment that the heat ceases to rise, however, the person becomes cool, and owing to the cooling the eyelids fall shut, and so the upper and outer parts of the body are cool, while the inner and lower ones, e.g. the feet, and the entrails are warm. Yet one might be in doubt as to the statement that the deepest sleep occurs after eating, that wine and other similar heating drinks are narcotic. To regard sleep as a cooling process is not reasonable. It is rather caused by heat. Or is one to suppose that analogously to the stomach, which is warm when it is empty, but as soon as it is filled becomes cool through its processes, so the channels and divisions of the head are cooled by the rise of evaporated matter? Or are we to suppose that analogously to persons pouring warm water over themselves and then suddenly shivering, so after the heat has risen, the collected cold produces a chill, and in this way counteracts the natural heat and drives it back? Again, when a large quantity of food is taken, which drives the warmth upward, the stomach is cooled until digestion takes place, just as fire is cooled when fresh wood is laid upon it. For sleep occurs, as we said, when crass evaporation under the influence of heat rises through the veins to the head. When this can continue no longer, because an excess of mass has been carried to the upper parts, then reaction takes place, and the evaporated matter flows back to the lower parts. Consequently, when the rising heat is withdrawn, men sink down. Man is the only animal that stands erect, and when the heat returns, it causes lapse of consciousness, and later awakens imagination. The explanation we have just given for the phenomenon of refrigeration is a possible one. The region about the brain, however, is the chief factor here, as we have said. The brain is the coldest part of the body, and in animals that have no brain, the part analogous to it is the coldest part. Just as water is evaporated by the sun's heat, and when it rises into the upper air is cooled by the air's temperature, and condensed falls to the earth once more in the form of water, so in the rise of heat to the brain the excessive evaporation is converted into viscid matter. For this reason, catarrhal affections appear to come from the brain, whereas the evaporation that assists nourishment and is normal returns to the lower parts condensed, and decreases the heat. The thinness and slender structure of the veins about the brain contribute to refrigeration and to the difficulty of their taking up the evaporation. This is the cause of refrigeration, even in cases where the evaporation creates an excessive degree of heat. Waking takes place when digestion has been completed, and the great amount of heat which is crowded into a small region out of the surrounding parts has gained control over the cold, and when further the crass blood has been separated from the purified blood. The thinnest and purest blood is in the head, the thickest and most turbid in the lower parts. The primary source of all blood is, as we have said in this treatise and elsewhere, the heart. Between the two chambers of the heart there is a middle chamber connected with both. The two chambers severally receive blood from the two arteries, from the great artery and the aorta, and the separation takes place in the middle chamber. The detailed treatment of this subject belongs, however, more properly to other treatises. On account of the unseparated character of the blood, after taking food, sleep occurs, and continues until the purest element is separated off and carried to the upper parts, and the more turbid element to the lower parts. When this is accomplished, sleepers are released from the heaviness caused by food and awake. The cause of sleep has, therefore, been explained as the reaction of crass vapour, which rises under the influence of its inherent heat on the primary organ of sensation. Sleep has also been explained as the inhibition of the primary sense organ, and its incapacity for function, and as a necessary phenomenon, for no animal can exist apart from the conditions which develop its nature, and sleep exists for the sake of preservation, for rest preserves. End of chapter 3. And end of On Sleeping and Waking. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Chapter 1 of On Dreams in Parva Naturalia by Aristotle. Translated by William Alexander Hammond. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Chapter 1. We must next investigate dreams, and inquire, first of all, in what part of the soul this phenomenon occurs, and whether it is an affection of the thinking power or of the sensible power. For it is solely by these two powers within us that we know at all. If the use of sight is vision, and of hearing audition, and of sense in general sensation, and, on the other hand, if there are common sensibles such as form, magnitude, number, etc., and particular sensibles such as colour, sound, flavour, and further, if it is impossible for any animal to see with its eyes closed and asleep, and if this applies equally to the other senses, then it is evident that we have no sensation in sleep, and so it is not by means of sensation that we experience dreaming. Neither are dreams mediated by opinion, for we not only say that an approaching object is a man or a horse, but also that it is white or beautiful, as to which qualities opinion, apart from sensation, makes no deliverances, whether true or false. However, this is just what the soul does in sleep, for, as in waking, so in sleep, we believe we see that the approaching object is a man, and that it is white. Again, we think of other things along with the dream, just as is the case with perception in our waking state, for we also often think about what we perceive. So in sleep, along with our imaginings, we sometimes have different thoughts. This would become apparent to anyone who would give attention on rising and try to remember. There have been persons who have in this way observed their dreams, as e.g., those who try to arrange their deliverances in accordance with the precepts of the mnemonic art. For it often happens in their case that along with the dream they put something else, an image before their eyes, in the place in question. And so it is clear that not every image seen in sleep is a dream, and what we think conceptually we regard as true or false through the organ of opinion. so much is clear on this subject that the same agency which in disease produces illusion while we are awake, also produces the condition of illusion in sleep. Even when we are in sound health and know the truth, still the sun appears to us to be only a foot in diameter. But whether the soul's powers of imagination and sensation are the same or different, in any case, dreams do not take place independently of seeing and some sort of sensation. For illusions of sight and hearing occur when a person really sees and hears something, although not the thing that he thinks he sees or hears. In sleep, however, there is, according to the foregoing hypothesis, no seeing, no hearing, no sensation at all. The hypothesis that there is no vision is therefore untrue, and that sensation experiences no excitation is untrue. On the other hand, it is possible for sight and the other senses to undergo some change, and things impinge on each of them to a certain extent, as in the sensation belonging to the waking state, though with a certain difference. Sometimes opinion declares that the seen object is false, as in the waking state. Sometimes it is held in check and conforms to the imagination. Evidently, the affection which we call dreaming does not belong to opinion, or to the thinking part of the soul. Neither does it belong to the sense part unqualifiedly, for it would then be possible to see and hear unqualifiedly. But we must consider in what sense and in what way it attaches to the part. Let us take this evident fact for a starting point, that if sleep is a condition of the sensitive part, so is dreaming. For sleeping and dreaming are not ascribable to different animal organs, but to the same organ, inasmuch as we discussed imagination in the treatise on the soul, and inasmuch as we find that the power of imagination is one with that of sensation, only that the mode of expression in the two cases is different, imagination being a process stimulated by an actual sensation. And since dreaming appears to be a form of imagination, for we call an imagination which we experience in sleep a dream, whether it is unconditioned or conditioned, it is evident that dreaming is a condition of the sensitive part, but of the sensitive part in its power to imagine. Chapter 2. We might best observe the nature of dreams and the way in which they are caused from the standpoint of what occurs in sleep. For sensible objects stimulate sensation in the several sense organs, and the mental condition produced thereby is not only present during the active process of sensation, but persists after the sensation has gone. The phenomenon here seems to be similar to that observed in the case of thrown objects. For in the case of a thrown object, the movement persists, although the mover is no longer in contact with the thing. For the moving body communicates motion to a certain part of the atmosphere, and this in turn sets another part in motion. And in this way, motion is caused both in the air and in water until the body comes to rest. One must suppose that something like this takes place also in qualitative change. A body that is warmed imparts by means of its heat warmth to the adjacent body, and this in turn distributes it further on until it reaches its terminal point. This, therefore, is what must take place in the organ wherewith we experience sensation, since actual sensation is a kind of qualitative change. Consequently, this condition is found in the sense organs, not only during the process of sensation, but also after the process has ceased, and in their inner depths as well as on the surface. This becomes evident when we have a sensation that continues over some time. For when we turn our senses to something else, the original sensation persists, as e.g., when we turn from the sun to a dark object. The result is that one sees nothing owing to the fact that the sense process stimulated by the light still lurks in the eyes, And if one looks a long time at a single colour, whether it be white or green, things appear to be similarly coloured wherever we turn our eyes. Again, if we look at the sun or some bright object and then shut our eyes, there appears to sharp observation, in the direct line which vision employs, first of all a colour like the actual one, which then changes to scarlet, then to purple, until it passes into blackness and vanishes. Also, the senses are affected in this way when they turn quickly from objects in motion, e.g. from looking at a river, and especially from looking at swiftly flowing streams, for objects at rest then seem to be in motion. And men are made deaf by loud noises, and their sense of smell is destroyed by strong odours, and so on. This evidently occurs as we describe it. That sense organs readily detect even minute distinctions is proven by the use of a mirror, concerning which fact one might stop at this point to investigate and make inquiries. From these inquiries it will at the same time become plain that just as sight is subject to an impression, so it exercises an activity. When women look into a very clear mirror, after their menstrual flow, the mirror's surface becomes covered with a bloody cloud, and if the mirror is new, the stain is hard to remove, but if it is old, the removal is easier. The reason is that the eye, as we said, not only receives an impression from the air, but it also produces an impression and a movement, just as bright things do. For the eye is classed amongst objects that are bright and possess colour. Eyes are constituted in the same way, it is reasonable to suppose, as any other bodily organ, and so they naturally contain veins. When, therefore, the menstrual flow takes place, owing to disturbance and flow of blood, there is a difference in the eyes imperceptible to us, but nevertheless real, for the seed and the monthly flow have the same nature. And the air is set in motion by the eyes, and the air being continuous to the mirror, it imparts to the latter a certain quality, and an impression similar to the one it has itself received. The air affects the surface of the mirror, but as the cleanest clothing is the most readily stained, so it is here. For a clean thing shows exactly whatever taint it receives, even the slightest effects, more than other things do. Bronze especially, owing to its smoothness, is affected by every contact. We must regard the contact of air as a kind of friction, as cleaning or washing, and, owing to the purity of the bronze, this contact, however slight, becomes visible. The reason why stains are not readily removable from new mirrors is to be found in the fact that they are clean and smooth. For stains penetrate deep into such mirrors, and in every direction, for owing to the mirror's pure surface, the spots go deep, and owing to its smooth polish, they spread in all directions. In old mirrors, the stain does not fasten, for it does not penetrate so deep, but stays rather on the surface. From these facts, it is evident that movement is excited by slight distinctions, that sensation is swift, and further, that the sense organ for colour not only receives impressions, but also reacts on external objects. Facts regarding wine and the preparation of ointments also furnish proof for these statements. For the prepared oil and wine readily take up the smells of adjacent objects, and they become tainted, not merely with the smell of things thrown into them, or mixed with them, but also of things that are placed, or grow in their near neighbourhood. In reference to our original inquiry, let us lay down one fundamental truth, which is evidenced by what has been said, viz., that after the removal of the external sensible object, the experienced sensations persist. To this we must add that when under the influence of strong feeling we are easily deceived regarding our sensations, different persons in different ways, as e.g. the coward under the influence of fear, and the lover under that of love have such illusions, that the former, owing to a trifling resemblance, thinks he sees an enemy, and the latter his beloved. And the more impressionable the person is, the less is the resemblance required. Similarly, everybody is easily deceived when in anger or influenced by any strong desire, and the more subject one is to these feelings, the more one is deceived. This is the reason why men sick of a fever sometimes think they see animals on the walls, owing to some slight resemblance in the figures drawn there. And this tendency to illusion, at times, keeps pace with the intensity of the emotional experience, so that in cases where the patient is not very sick, he is still conscious of the deception, but where his condition is more aggravated, he even rushes upon these animals. The explanation of this phenomenon is that the intellect and the faculty in which our images arise do not pass judgment with the same power. A proof of this is that the sun appears to us only a foot in diameter, and there is many another fact which contradicts our imagination. Also, by crossing the fingers, a single object under them appears to be two, and yet we do not say there are two, for sight is more decisive than touch. If, however, touch were our only sense, our judgment would declare that the single object is two. The source of illusion is found in the fact that things, whatever they may be, are perceived not merely while the stimulation of the sense object continues, but also during the further activity of the sense itself, if this movement is the prolongation of that awakened by the sensible object. I mean, e.g., the shore appears to sailors to move, although it is by something other than the shore that the eye is set in motion. Chapter 3. From these considerations, it is clear that sense processes, whether arising from external objects or bodily activities, take place not merely during the waking state, but occur also in sleep, and that at this time they appear even more numerous. For during the day they are kept in the background by the combined activity of the senses and the intellect, and so are obscured, just as a small fire is obscured when placed alongside a larger one, or as trivial pleasures or pains are obscured alongside of great ones. But when the latter have vanished, then the smaller ones rise to view. At night, owing to the inactivity of the special senses and their incapacity to function, caused by the return flow of heat from the outer into the inward parts, these sense movements are carried to the primary seat of sensation, and become clear when the disturbance has subsided. And we must suppose, as tiny whirlpools occur in rivers, so each movement goes on continuously, frequently in the same direction, and again resolved into other forms through counter-influences. Consequently, after eating, and in the case of very young persons, as e.g. in children, dreams do not occur, for there is a strong movement excited by the heat in food. The case here is similar to what occurs in water when it is violently agitated, viz., sometimes no image is reflected, and sometimes only an entirely distorted one, so that the thing appears different from the reality. On the other hand, when the water is still, we see clear and distinct images. So too, in sleep, the images and residual movements resulting from sensations are sometimes entirely obliterated by a movement greater than the given one, and sometimes visions appear confused and monstrous, and the dreams are not marked by normal health, but are such as one finds in the atrabilious, in men sick of a fever, and in men that are drunken. For all these conditions are like flatulency, and excite great movement and disturbance. But when in sanguineous creatures the blood has come to rest and is separated off, the movement of sensation that proceeds from each sense organ and persists awakens normal dreams and causes an image to appear, and the person to believe that he sees something owing to the influences discharged from sight, and to hear owing to the influences discharged from hearing, and similarly with the other senses. For by the transmission of this movement from these special organs to the primary seat of sensation, one believes, in the waking state, that one sees and hears and perceives, and because it sometimes happens that sight seems to be stimulated without its being really so stimulated, we say that we see, and because touch reports two movements, we believe a single object to be two. In a word, the primary sense affirms the deliverances of the special sense, when no other more decisive sense contradicts this. There is without doubt an appearance, but what appears is not in every case believed, unless the power of judgment is inhibited or is not exercised in its normal way. But, as we said, that some persons are subject to illusion under one condition, and others under another, so when asleep one is deceived by the processes of sleep, by the excitations of the sense organs, and by other affections of sensation to such a degree that something which bears only a slight resemblance to a given thing is thought to be that thing. For when one is asleep, and the mass of blood recedes to the central organ, the movements in the blood, whether latent or actual, concentrate there. And the conditions here are such that, if the blood is stirred, a particular movement rises to the surface, and if this subsides, then another follows. They are related to each other like artificial frogs, which rise to the surface of the water as soon as the salt on them is melted off. And so these movements are latent in the blood, and as soon as the hindrance is removed, they come to active expression. When set free in the small amount of blood remaining in the sense organs, they stir themselves, exhibiting a likeness to things such as we see in clouds, which resemble men and centaurs in quickly shifting forms. Each of these images is, as we have said, the residue of actual sensation. After the true sensation has gone, the image continues, and it is correct to say that it is something like Coriscus, although not Coriscus. And at the moment of sensation, the master organ and judging faculty do not say that this is Coriscus, but only that, owing to this sensation, the real Coriscus is yonder person. On experiencing this sensation, the master sense makes the above deliverance, provided it is not entirely inhibited by the blood, just as without sensation, this movement is set up by the processes latent in the sense organs. This latter, which resembles a thing, one then regards as the real thing. And the power of sleep is so great that it causes us to be unconscious of this difference. If one presses one's fingers under the eyes and does not notice it, a single thing not only appears double, but is believed to be so. If the pressure is noticed, the thing appears to be double, but is not believed to be so, and this is what happens in sleep. If a person perceives that he is asleep, and is aware of the sleeping condition in which the sensation occurs, then the appearance will be present indeed, but there is something in the person which says this is only a phantasm of Coriscus, and is not Coriscus himself. For there is often something in the soul of the sleeper which says that the appearance is only a dream. If, however, he is not conscious of the sleeping state, then nothing contradicts the imagination. That the above statement is correct, and that we have movements of imagination in the sense organs, becomes clear if in falling asleep and on waking we attentively try to remember what happens. For sometimes one will detect on waking that the images which appear in sleep are movements in the sense organs. In the case of certain young persons whose sight is thoroughly good, there appear before them, when it is dark, a multitude of moving images, so that they conceal themselves in fright. From all these facts one must conclude that a dream is a kind of sleeping phantasm, for the imaginings in children just referred to are not dreams, nor is anything else which is seen when we have the free use of our senses. Neither is every imagination that occurs in sleep a dream, for in the first place many persons have in sleep the power, in some form or other, of perceiving sound, colour, flavor, or touch, although the sensation is weak and seems to come from afar. Persons who are asleep and open their eyes slightly, and then suddenly awake, have discovered the reality of the lamplight, which in sleep they saw only, as they thought, in a glimmer, and hearing the faint crowing of a cock, or the bark of a dog, they have, on waking, recognized them as loud voices. Some persons even reply to questions. For it is possible that when one or the other of these states, waking or sleeping, is unquestionably present, the other may be present to some extent. In these cases there can be no dream, neither can such processes of real thought as occur in sleep along with fancies be called dreams, but a dream is that form of imagination that originates in the movement of sensation during the sleeping state as such. It has occurred in certain instances that men have never in their lives known themselves to have a dream. In other cases they have observed them when far advanced in years without having noticed them earlier. The reason why dreams do not occur in these cases seems to be closely allied to the reason which prevents their occurrence in children and after eating. For persons who are by nature so constituted that a large amount of vaporous matter ascends to their upper parts, or the return of this matter produces in them great movement, it is reasonable to suppose that in these cases there are no dream fancies. In advancing years there is nothing remarkable in the fact that dreams make their appearance. For where a certain physical change takes place, whether owing to age or to some internal affection, this changed condition regarding dreams must also occur. End of chapter 3 and end of On Dreams. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Chapter 1 of On Prophecy in Sleep in Parva Naturalia by Aristotle, translated by William Alexander Hammond. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards. Chapter 1. Regarding prophecy in sleep, and the prophecy said to be derivable from dreams, it is difficult either to treat it with contempt or to believe in it. For the universal or widespread belief in the prophetic nature of dreams, based as it is on experience, lends support to this view, and it is not incredible that certain events are foreseen in dreams. There is a certain reasonableness in this, and so one might, in like manner, apply this belief to other dreams. The fact, however, that one cannot discover any intelligible cause for their occurrence creates distrust in them. The theory of divine origin is absurd, because in addition to its irrationality, one observes that these dreams do not come to the best and wisest, but to all sorts of men. But when their divine causation is excluded, there is no other reasonable origin that one can assign. For it seems to transcend our power of understanding to discover an explanation of the story that certain persons foretell the future through legends on the Pillars of Hercules or on the Borysthenes. Dreams, taken either in their entirety, or partially, or singly, must then be causes or signs of events, or else they must be accidental phenomena. Cause, I understand, in the sense of the moon's being the cause of the sun's eclipse, and fatigue being the cause of fever. By sign, I mean e.g., that a sign of an eclipse is a star's becoming visible in daylight, or the roughness of the tongue in fever. By an accidental phenomenon, I mean e.g., that an eclipse of the sun happens while one is taking a walk, for taking a walk is neither sign nor cause of an eclipse, neither is an eclipse the sign or cause of taking a walk. Consequently, no accidental phenomenon takes place constantly, or even as a rule. Is it then possible that some dreams are causes and others signs, e.g., of physical events? Well-educated physicians, at any rate, say that we should pay close attention to dreams, and this view is also regarded as reasonable by laymen who are investigators and philosophers. For the physical movements that occur by day, unless they are very full and vigorous, are unnoticed when they are experienced along with greater waking excitations. In sleep, however, the reverse is true, for then the trivial movements seem to be the important ones, as is apparent from frequently observed facts regarding sleep. When slight noises fall upon the ear, one thinks it lightens and thunders. And when a bit of mucus flows into the mouth, one thinks one is tasting the sweet flavour of honey. And when a very slight heat is felt in any member, one thinks one is walking through fire, and is fever hot. But when one awakes, one discovers the real facts. Since then all beginnings are small, it is evident that the beginning of disease and other bodily affections on the point of development will be small, and these necessarily show themselves more in sleep than in the waking state. Yet it is really not unreasonable to suppose that certain sleeping fancies are causes of actions peculiar to the individual. For when we are on the point of doing something, or are in the midst of it, or have accomplished it, it frequently happens that we are occupied and busy with the same thing in a distinct dream, the explanation of which is that the dream movement has been already started from origins in the day's activity. And as this is true, so the converse must be true, viz., that the movements in sleep are often the starting points for the activities of the day, because the thought for the latter is already started on its way in our nocturnal fancies. In this sense, therefore, certain dreams may be signs and causes, but most prophetic dreams are things of chance, especially all those that transcend us and whose origination is not in our power, as e.g. a naval battle and remote events. The situation here is just like that of a man who thinks of a thing, and in that instant the thing appears. For what is there to prevent this being also true of dreams? It is even more likely that many accidents of this sort should occur here. Just as, in the former case, thinking of a thing is neither sign nor cause of the thing's appearing, so here the beholder's dream is neither sign nor cause of the event, but only accident. Consequently, most dreams do not come true, for chance is that which occurs neither constantly nor even as a rule. Chapter 2. Since other animals than man have dreams, one may say, in a word, that dreams are not sent from God, and do not occur for his ends. They are, however, demonic, for their nature is demonic, but not divine. This is proven by the fact that very ordinary men have prophetic visions and true dreams, showing that God does not send them. But such men as have a loquacious and atrabilious nature see all sorts of visions, and because these excitations are many and diversified, they chance upon thoughts which correspond with reality, hitting the right thing here, just as one sometimes hits in the game of quote, odd and even, close quote. For in this instance the proverb applies, quote, who often shoots will sometimes hit, close quote. That many dreams do not come true is not strange, for even the signs in physical and heavenly processes, such as the signs of rain and wind, often fail. For if another movement sets in which is stronger than the one indicated, the indicated event does not take place. Also, many well-matured plans of what ought to be done fail of execution because other more important motives arise. For not every expected event occurs, and one must not identify the future with the expected. Nevertheless, one must say that there are certain causes to which this lack of fulfillment is due, and these are natural signs of the non-occurrence of the given events. In regard to dreams which are not due to such origins as we have mentioned, but to origins that either in point of time, place, or magnitude are extraordinary, or which are not to be described in this way at all, and yet the dreamer does not have in himself the cause, in these cases, unless the prophetic character is accidental, it would be better to explain such foresight in the following way, rather than in the way employed by Democritus, who explains them by images and effluxes. Just as when water or air is stirred, the stirred part sets another part in motion, and after this has come to rest, a similar motion is continued up to a certain point, even in the absence of the moving agent. So nothing prevents a certain movement and sensation from reaching the soul in sleep, produced by those objects from which Democritus says images and effluxes are thrown off. And these movements, reaching the soul in some way or other, are more distinctly felt at night, because they are more readily dissipated when they enter by day. For the night air is less apt to be disturbed, owing to the calmer nature of night. And they awaken sensation in the body on account of sleep. For persons when asleep detect slight internal processes more sharply than when awake. These movements awaken fancies out of which one foresees the future in events similar to the fancies. This power of prevision, then, occurs in any ordinary person, and not in the wisest. For if prevision were sent of God, it would come by day and to the wise. In this manner, however, it is reasonable that prevision comes to ordinary men. For the minds of such persons are not given to careful thought, but are, as it were, reft and empty of all content, and when stimulated, they follow the lead of the moving agent. The reason why certain persons afflicted with ecstatic mania have prevision is that their own excitations do not distract them, but are rather thrown off by them, and therefore they have a special perception of processes foreign to them. That some persons have true dreams, and that familiar acquaintances have prevision, especially regarding each other, comes from the fact that acquaintances concern themselves most about each other. For just as it is most true of intimate friends that they recognize and see each other at a distance better than others do, so it is also with these movements. For the movements of acquaintances are more easily recognized. The atrabilious, like long-distance throwers, owing to the vehemence of their natures, hit their aim, and owing to their mobile disposition, they have a quick fancy for sequence. For as Philagades in his poems, and insane persons, recite and think out sequences that depend on similarity, as illustrated in the Song of Aphrodite, so these dreamers string together a series of events. For, owing to their passionate nature, they are not swerved aside by extraneous movements. The most skilful interpreter of dreams is he who can discern resemblances. For a plain dream can be interpreted by anybody. By resemblances I mean, as I said before, that the pictures of imagination are very like pictures in the water. In the latter, when the movement is violent, the reflection and picture bear no resemblance to the reality. And so a clever interpreter is one who can quickly distinguish and see at a glance in the confused and distorted picture the suggestion of a man, or horse, or whatever the given object may be. And as the picture in the water, so the dream can be similarly distorted, for movement destroys the distinctness of dreams. We have now explained the nature of sleep and dreams, and have given the cause of their occurrence, and have further explained the entire subject of divination by means of them. End of Chapter 2, and end of On Prophecy in Sleep. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Chapter 1 of On Longevity and Shortness of Life in Parva Naturalia by Aristotle, translated by William Alexander Hammond. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards. Chapter 1. We must now inquire into the causes why some animals live long and others only a short time, and into the general subject of longevity and shortness of life. The initial point in our inquiry must be the stating of certain preliminary problems touching these phenomena. For it is not clear whether or not the cause of longevity and shortness of life is the same in animals and plants. Some plants are annuals, and others attain great age. Further, one may ask whether amongst the creatures of nature the long-lived and the naturally healthy are identical. Or is shortness of life to be kept distinct from questions of disease? Or is it true that some diseases cause the body whose nature is affected to be short-lived, while other diseases in no wise prevent long life? Regarding sleeping and waking, we have already spoken, and we must later on treat the subjects of life and death, and likewise disease and health, so far as they fall within the province of the philosophy of nature. At present, we have to consider, as already said, the causes of longevity and shortness of life. This distinction of longevity marks entire genera in comparison with others, and again it marks certain members of one species in comparison with other members. By this I mean there is a generic difference in longevity applicable, e.g., to man and horse, for the genus man is longer lived than the genus horse. And again, within the species, one man is longer lived than another, for some men are long-lived and others short-lived, according to the districts they inhabit. Nations that inhabit warm countries live longer. The inhabitants of cold countries are less long-lived. And amongst those that inhabit the same locality, there are also between individuals differences in this respect. Chapter 2. We must understand what is easily destroyed in natural structures, and what is destroyed with difficulty. Fire and water and other elements akin to them, without having their power, are, in their reciprocal action, the causes of generation and decay. Consequently, everything else one may reasonably suppose that is derived from or composed of these elements shares in their nature, excepting such things as are artificially composed of a great many parts, like a house. The discussion of these other elements does not belong here. Many things are subject to destruction from causes peculiar to themselves, as e.g., knowledge, health, and disease. For these are destroyed when the things of which they are qualities are not destroyed, but survive, e.g., the agency which destroys ignorance is recollection and learning. The agency which destroys knowledge is forgetfulness and error. Accidentally, the destruction of other properties goes hand in hand with the destruction of the natural body. For when animals are destroyed, the knowledge and health that are in them are also destroyed. From this, one might draw a conclusion regarding the soul. For if the soul is not in the body by natural growth, but is there just as knowledge is in the soul, then it would be exposed to another destroying agency in addition to that to which it is liable in the destruction of the body. But this does not appear to be the case. The relation between soul and body must be differently understood. Chapter 3. Perhaps one might reasonably ask the question, is there any place where the perishable is imperishable, as in the case of fire in the empyrean, which is subject to no opposing influence? For the properties that attach to opposites are incidentally destroyed by the destruction of the thing itself. For opposites destroy one another. No opposite, however, which belongs to substance is incidentally destroyed, for substance is not predicated of any subject. Consequently, in whatsoever thing there is no principle of opposition, and where there is no such principle, there can be no destruction. For what is there to work destruction, if destruction is effected exclusively by opposites? But there is no opposition present, either absolutely or in any particular part. Or is this true in one sense and in another false? For whatever has matter cannot avoid being in some sense subject to opposition. It can be everywhere hot or straight, but it cannot be in its entirety hot or straight or white. For these qualities would then be separate entities. Whenever the active and passive come together, if the one always acts and the other is always acted upon, change must take place. Further, if change necessarily produces a residue, then residue involves opposition, for change is always the result of opposition, and residue is that which remains from a state prior to change. But if the actually opposed were entirely excluded, a thing would, in this case, be imperishable. Or is this untrue? But a thing in this event would be destroyed by its environment. If this happens, then the above explanation is adequate. If the destruction is not so produced, one must suppose there is an actual inherent opposition in the thing, and that a residue is produced. For this reason, the lesser flame is incidentally consumed by the larger one, because the food which the smaller one consumes in a long time in the form of smoke is consumed by the larger one quickly. And so everything is in constant motion, constantly coming into existence and passing out of existence. And the environment either assists or opposes. Constantly changing things may last a longer or a shorter time than their own nature prescribes, but nothing lasts forever where opposites exist. For, at the very start, matter contains in itself the principles of opposition, so that if one employs the category of place, spatial change is involved. If one employs the category of quantity, we have changes of growth and decay. If one employs passivity, then qualitative change. Chapter 4. Neither are the largest creatures less exposed to destruction than others, for the horse is shorter lived than man, nor the small animals, for many insects live only a year. Nor in general are plants longer lived than animals, for some plants are annuals. Nor are sanguineous animals, by virtue of their being sanguineous, long lived, for bees live longer than do certain sanguineous animals. Neither are the bloodless animals, as such, long lived, for molluscs, which are bloodless, live only a year. Nor land animals, for there are both plants and land animals that live only a year. Nor sea animals, for the crustaceans and molluscs are short-lived. On the whole, the longest-lived organisms are found amongst plants, an example of which is the palm. Next, the sanguineous live longer than the bloodless animals, and the land animals longer than those that live in water, so that the longest-lived animals are those where we find the combined marks of having blood and living on the land, as instanced in man and the elephant. It is a rule also that the larger animals are longer lived than the smaller ones, and this characteristic of size applies to other examples of longest-lived animals, as well as to the instances cited. Chapter 5. The cause of all this might be discovered in the following facts. One must understand that an animal is by nature moist and warm, and life is also moist and warm, whereas old age is dry and cold, and so is death. And this is plain to observation. The matter in living bodies has these qualities of warm and cold, dry and moist. As beings grow old, they must then dry up, and so the moist should be constituted in such way as not to dry up easily. Now, fatty elements do not readily decay. The reason is that they contain air, and air compared with other elements is fire. but fire is not subject to decay. The amount of moisture should not be small, for a small amount is quickly dried out. Consequently, larger animals and plants are, as a rule, longer lived than others, as we said before. For it is reasonable to suppose that the larger creatures possess a greater supply of moisture. But it is not merely for this reason that they are longer lived. For there are two causes of long life, a quantitative and qualitative cause. Consequently, there must not merely be a certain quantity of moisture present, but this must also be warm, in order that it be not easily congealed or dried up. It is for this reason that man is longer lived than certain larger animals. For animals that are defective in the mass of moisture are longer lived, provided their excess in the quality of this moisture is relatively greater than their defect in its quantity. Some animals have an oily warmth, in consequence of which their moisture is not easily dried up or chilled. Others again have a moisture of a different sort. Further, whatever is meant to be difficult to destroy should not throw off much residue, for this, whether it be due to disease or to nature, destroys a thing. Residue has the significance of opposition, and is destructive of a thing, either in its entire nature or in some part of it. Consequently, salacious animals and such as abound in seed age quickly, for seed is a residue, and when it is thrown off produces dryness. For this reason a mule lives longer than a horse or an ass, and women live longer than men in cases where men are lascivious, and so male sparrows are shorter lived than females. Further, males subjected to hard labour are short-lived, and on account of toil age more rapidly. For toil produces dryness, and old age is dry. In the ordinary course of nature, and taking it all in all, men live longer than women. The reason for this is that the male is a warmer animal than the female. The same classes of animals live longer in a warm than in a cold climate, for the same reason that the larger animals live longer than smaller ones. Particularly striking in this connection is the size of the naturally cold animals. So snakes, lizards, and rough-scaled reptiles found in warm localities, and the testacea of the Red Sea attain a great size. For warm moisture is the cause of growth and life. In cold districts, animal moisture is more watery and consequently easily congealed, so that animals with little or no blood, whether their habitation is the land or water, do not occur at all in the northern regions, or if they occur, they are smaller and shorter lived, for frost impedes growth. Both plants and animals perish when they get no nourishment, for then they consume themselves, just as a larger consumes and destroys a smaller flame by using up its food, so the natural warmth, whose primary function is digestion, consumes the matter in which it is found. Aquatic animals are shorter lived than land animals, not because they are moist unqualifiedly, but because they are watery. Moisture of this sort is very perishable, because it is cold and easily congealed. For the same reason, the bloodless animal is very perishable, unless it is protected by great size, because it contains no oily or sweet element. I say sweet, for animal fat is sweet. Consequently, bees are longer lived than other animals that are larger. Chapter 6. It is amongst plants that we find the longest lived organisms, and these attain a higher age than animals, in the first place because they are less watery, and therefore not easily congealed. Secondly, they contain a viscous oily substance, and therefore, although they are dry and earthy, they nevertheless possess a moisture which is not easily dried out. We must now find an explanation for the great age attained by trees, for a peculiar explanation applies to them which does not apply to animals, excepting insects. This peculiarity is that plants constantly renew themselves and so attain great age. For new shoots are put forth from time to time, and others grow old, and the same thing is true of the roots. But this renewal does not take place in all parts at once. Sometimes only the trunk and branches die, and others grow up alongside of them. And when this happens, other roots spring from the remaining part. And so it continues, one part passing out of existence, and another part coming into being. Consequently, they live long. Plants have a resemblance to insects, as already said. For life continues when they are divided, and out of one insect or plant, 2 or several are produced. Divided insects, however, reach merely to the state of living, but are not able to continue long in life, for they have no organs, and the principle of life in the single part has no power to develop an organ. This principle in the plant, on the contrary, has the power of developing organs, for it contains in every case both root and stem potentially. Consequently, the new and the aging branch keep growing from this, differing little in their length of life, just as it is with grafts. In the grafting of shoots, one would say that, in a certain sense, the same process occurs, for the shoot is part of a plant. In the grafting of shoots, however, the continuity of life occurs in a state of separation from the mother plant, while in the other cases the lives are conjoined. The reason is that the inherent potential principle in the plant is all-pervasive. There is, however, a point of identity between animals and plants. In animals, the males are, as a rule, longer lived than the females, for their upper parts are larger than the lower ones. The male is more dwarf-like than the female. The warm element is found in the upper parts, and cold in the lower ones. Also, plants with large roots are longer lived than the others. Annuals are not of this kind, but trees are, for the upper part and head of a plant is the root, but annuals have their main growth towards the lower parts and the fruit. These questions will be examined in detail in the treatise on plants. For the present, we have explained the cause of longevity and shortness of life in animals. There remain for our consideration the subjects of youth and old age, life and death, and after these have been investigated, our treatise on animals will have been finished. End of chapter 6, and end of On Longevity and Shortness of Life. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards.